Welcome, traveler, and thank you for joining me on another gentle journey into the past. Tonight, we are going to travel back in time, far away from the bright lights and loud noises of our modern world. Close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and let your mind drift away. When we think of the Middle Ages, our minds often paint a very beautiful, very romantic picture. We imagine brave knights in shining armor, riding noble horses across wide green fields. We picture grand stone castles with high towers, reaching up to touch the clouds. We dream of kings and queens, dressed in fine silk and warm velvet, dining at massive wooden tables filled with roasted meats and sweet wines. It is a cozy, comforting fairy tale that we have all been told since we were little children. But before we gently pull back the curtain on this fairy tale, I want to ask for a small favor. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. It costs nothing at all, but it truly helps the channel grow, and it allows me to keep making these relaxing historical journeys just for you. Now, settle in, get completely comfortable, and let us leave the 21st century behind. The truth about history is always a little more complicated than the stories we tell ourselves. The romantic vision of the Middle Ages was only a reality for a very tiny fraction of the people. For the 1% at the very top, life might have been a grand adventure filled with music and feasts. But tonight, we are not going to visit the king in his royal court. We are going to look at the reality of everyday life. We are going to imagine what it would be like if you were just a normal, everyday person living right in the beating heart of medieval London. And the reality is, it was not magical at all. In fact, it was incredibly difficult, rough, and above all else, deeply uncomfortable. Imagine yourself standing on a hill just outside the city, looking down at London in the 14th century. From a distance, it almost looks peaceful. You can see the great river Thames winding through the landscape like a thick silver ribbon. You can see the towering spire of the old St. Paul's Cathedral reaching toward the heavens. The city is entirely surrounded by a massive, thick stone wall, built long ago by the Romans to keep danger out. It looks like a safe haven, a fortress of human civilization, standing strong against the wild forests of England. But as you start to walk down the hill and get closer to those towering stone gates, the beautiful illusion begins to fade away. The first thing you notice is not what you see, but what you smell. A thick, heavy scent hangs in the air, miles before you even reach the city walls. It is a smell of wood smoke, sweat, rotting food, and things much worse than that. As you walk through the dark, heavy wooden gates of the city, the open sky suddenly vanishes. You are swallowed whole by a maze of incredibly narrow, twisted streets. There is no sunlight reaching the ground here. The houses are built from timber and plaster, tall and crooked. They lean forward over the streets, so close together at the top that neighbors on the second floor could almost reach out and shake hands across the alleyway. The ground beneath your feet is not paved with smooth stones or modern asphalt. It is a thick, slippery layer of mud, mixed with animal waste, garbage, and dirty water. Your boots sink into the muck with every single step, making a heavy, squelching sound. You have to keep your head down to watch your footing, but you also have to keep looking up. Because in medieval London, danger does not just come from the street level. It rains down from the windows above, as people casually empty their waste into the alleyways below without a second thought. The air feels thick, almost too heavy to breathe comfortably. You are just an ordinary worker in this bustling, chaotic city. Your life is completely bound by the rising and setting of the sun. There are no quiet private spaces here. You share your world with thousands of other people, all crammed together in a space that was never designed to hold so many souls. It is a world of constant struggle, where simply surviving another day feels like a victory. The fairy tale of knights and kings is completely forgotten, replaced by the gritty, unpolished reality of survival. As the sun begins to set outside, the shadows in the narrow streets grow longer and much darker. A deep chill creeps into the damp air, settling into your bones. It is time to leave the muddy, crowded streets behind and find shelter for the night. You make your way to your small, dark, timber-framed house. You push open the heavy, creaking wooden door and step inside, desperate for a moment of peace and warmth. You close the door firmly behind you, shutting out the noise of the medieval city. But as you stand in the absolute darkness of your home, preparing to rest your tired body, you realize that the discomfort is far from over. In fact, as you approach your bed to sleep, the true reality of medieval life is just waiting for you in the dark. Welcome, traveler, and thank you for joining me on another gentle journey into the past. Tonight, we are going to travel back in time, far away from the bright lights and loud noises of our modern world. Close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and let your mind drift away. When we think of the Middle Ages, our minds often paint a very beautiful, very romantic picture. We imagine brave knights in shining armor, riding noble horses across wide green fields. We picture grand stone castles with high towers, reaching up to touch the clouds. We dream of kings and queens, dressed in fine silk and warm velvet, dining at massive wooden tables filled with roasted meats and sweet wines. It is a cozy, comforting fairy tale that we have all been told since we were little children. But before we gently pull back the curtain on this fairy tale, I want to ask for a small favor. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. It costs nothing at all, but it truly helps the channel grow, and it allows me to keep making these relaxing historical journeys just for you. Now, settle in, get completely comfortable, and let us leave the 21st century behind. The truth about history is always a little more complicated than the stories we tell ourselves. The romantic vision of the Middle Ages was only a reality for a very tiny fraction of the people. For the 1% at the very top, life might have been a grand adventure filled with music and feasts. But tonight, we are not going to visit the king in his royal court. We are going to look at the reality of everyday life. We are going to imagine what it would be like if you were just a normal, everyday person, living right in the beating heart of medieval London. And the reality is, it was not magical at all. In fact, it was incredibly difficult, rough, and above all else, deeply uncomfortable. Imagine yourself standing on a hill just outside the city, looking down at London in the 14th century. From a distance, it almost looks peaceful. You can see the great River Thames winding through the landscape like a thick silver ribbon. You can see the towering spire of the old St. Paul's Cathedral reaching toward the heavens. The city is entirely surrounded by a massive, thick stone wall, built long ago by the Romans to keep danger out. It looks like a safe haven, a fortress of human civilization standing strong against the wild forests of England. But as you start to walk down the hill and get closer to those towering stone gates, the beautiful illusion begins to fade away. The first thing you notice is not what you see, but what you smell. A thick, heavy scent hangs in the air, miles before you even reach the city walls. It is a smell of wood smoke, sweat, rotting food, and things much worse than that. As you walk through the dark, heavy wooden gates of the city, the open sky suddenly vanishes. You are swallowed whole by a maze of incredibly narrow, twisted streets. There is no sunlight reaching the ground here. The houses are built from timber and plaster, tall and crooked. They lean forward over the streets, so close together at the top that neighbors on the second floor could almost reach out and shake hands across the alleyway. The ground beneath your feet is not paved with smooth stones or modern asphalt. It is a thick, slippery layer of mud, mixed with animal waste, garbage, and dirty water. Your boots sink into the muck with every single step, making a heavy, squelching sound. You have to keep your head down to watch your footing, but you also have to keep looking up. Because in medieval London, danger does not just come from the street level. It rains down from the windows above, as people casually empty their waste into the alleyways below without a second thought. The air feels thick, almost too heavy to breathe comfortably. You are just an ordinary worker in this bustling, chaotic city. Your life is completely bound by the rising and setting of the sun. There are no quiet, private spaces here. You share your world with thousands of other people, all crammed together in a space that was never designed to hold so many souls. It is a world of constant struggle, where simply surviving another day feels like a victory. The fairy tale of knights and kings is completely forgotten, replaced by the gritty, unpolished reality of survival. As the sun begins to set outside, the shadows in the narrow streets grow longer and much darker. A deep chill creeps into the damp air, settling into your bones. It is time to leave the muddy, crowded streets behind and find shelter for the night. You make your way to your small, dark, timber-framed house. You push open the heavy, creaking wooden door and step inside, desperate for a moment of peace and warmth. You close the door firmly behind you, shutting out the noise of the medieval city. But as you stand in the absolute darkness of your home, preparing to rest your tired body, you realize that the discomfort is far from over. In fact, as you approach your bed to sleep, the true reality of medieval life is just waiting for you in the dark. You grab the heavy iron ring of your door, pull it open, and step out into the bitter morning air. Instantly, the illusion of a quiet morning is completely shattered. There are no peaceful birds singing, and there is no smell of fresh dew on green grass. Instead, you are hit with a wave of cold, damp fog, mixed with the choking smoke of 1,000 wood fires just beginning to burn. The air here does not feel crisp or refreshing. It feels incredibly heavy, coating the back of your throat with a taste of soot and stale breath. You step forward to begin your morning commute, but there is no smooth concrete sidewalk waiting for your feet. There are no organized lanes for walking and riding. Medieval London's streets were a chaotic, muddy mess that defied any modern sense of urban planning. Most of the alleyways are just strips of bare, beaten earth. Right down the very center of the street runs a shallow ditch known as a kennel. In theory, this ditch was meant to carry rainwater away to the river, but in reality, it is a stagnant, horrible trench filled with every kind of filth imaginable. As you take your first few steps, you must carefully calculate exactly where to place your boots. The ground is entirely covered in a thick, dark slime that locals simply call mud, but it is so much more than just wet dirt. It is a foul, slippery soup made of crushed, rotting vegetables, horse manure, pig dung, discarded animal bones, and whatever else people decided to throw out their doors the night before. With every single step you take, Your leather boots sink deep into this foul mixture, making a wet, sticky, squelching sound that echoes down the street. Walking is not just a form of travel here. It is an exhausting physical battle against the very ground beneath your feet. But the claustrophobia of your morning walk does not just come from the crowded, muddy earth. It comes from the sky, or rather, the complete lack of it. As you walk, you feel an overwhelming sense that the city is physically pressing down on top of you. This is because the timber-framed houses on either side of the street use an architectural style known as jettying. Because space on the ground was so limited and expensive, builders made the second floor wider than the first floor, and the third floor even wider than the second. The houses literally lean forward, stretching out over the street below. Because of this, the streets feel like dark wooden tunnels. Even in the middle of the day, very little direct sunlight ever reaches the ground level where you are walking. If you pause and look straight up, all you can see is a tiny, jagged slit of grey sky, trapped between the leaning rooftops of the houses. This lack of sunlight means the deep mud in the streets almost never dries out. It stays permanently wet, permanently rotting, and permanently breeding diseases that no one in this era truly understands. As the city wakes up, the narrow tunnel of your street becomes incredibly crowded. You are bumped and pushed by other laborers rushing to their workshops, heads down against the cold. You have to quickly step aside to avoid a massive, heavy wooden cart being pulled by an angry horse, its massive iron-rimmed wheels churning the terrible mud up into the air. Stray pigs and aggressive chickens wander freely between your legs, rooting through the garbage in the central gutter, looking for their breakfast. The noise is already becoming overwhelming, bouncing loudly off the close wooden walls. To survive this daily commute, you quickly learn a very important lesson. You learn to keep your chin tucked into your chest and your eyes glued firmly to the muddy ground right in front of your boots. You are so intensely focused on avoiding the deep puddles of waste, the rotting food, and the wandering animals, that you get completely lost in the rhythm of your own footsteps. Squelch, step. Squelch, step. But keeping your head down is a terrible, terrible mistake in medieval London. Because while you are so carefully watching the ground, you have completely forgotten to watch the windows directly above your head. And suddenly, you hear the sharp, terrifying sound of wooden shutters violently swinging open on the second floor. Your heart suddenly skips a beat as the wooden shutters rattle and bang against the side of the house above you. In that terrifying split second, your survival instincts kick in. You freeze in your tracks, your boots sinking slightly deeper into the cold mud, and you snap your head upwards toward the narrow strip of grey sky. A shadow moves in the second-story window, leaning out over the dark, crowded street. There might be a quick, muffled shout of warning, or there might be absolute silence. But before you even have a chance to jump back or press yourself against the muddy wall of the alleyway, you see a clay pot tilting over the edge. You see, in a city with no indoor plumbing, no flushing toilets, and no running water, nighttime emergencies have to be handled locally. Every single household, from the poorest cramped room to the wealthy merchant's house, relies on a simple chamber pot. It is usually kept tucked under the straw bed, slowly filling up throughout the dark, freezing night. By the time the cold morning finally arrives, these pots are brimming to the very edge. Now, a responsible citizen is supposed to carefully carry their pot down the narrow, dangerous wooden stairs. They are supposed to walk it to a designated public cesspit or a distant riverbank. But human nature rarely changes, and people are terribly lazy. especially when it is freezing cold outside. So, instead of a long, miserable walk to the local dump, many Londoners simply take the easiest way out. They open their windows, hold the heavy pot over the ledge, and let gravity do the hard work. As you stand completely frozen in the street below, you watch in a kind of slow-motion horror as the thick, foul contents of the chamber pot are tossed out into the damp morning air. It falls in a terrible dark arc through the fog. If the person tossing it has good aim, the waste might splash directly into the open kennel, but shallow, rotting gutter running down the middle of the street. But accuracy is rare in the early hours of the morning. Often, the filthy liquid shatters against the muddy ground, splashing high up onto the walls, onto the wandering pigs, and onto the heavy wool cloaks of whoever happens to be walking by. If you're incredibly unlucky, you take a direct hit from above. There is no dry cleaner in medieval London to save your only warm coat. There is no hot shower waiting for you to scrub the indignity away. If you get splashed, you simply have to wipe it off with a piece of dirty cloth or a handful of straw, and carry that terrible heavy scent with you for the rest of the entire day. Walking through the city is a constant, exhausting game of looking down to avoid the mud, and looking up to dodge the falling rain of human waste. But chamber pots are not the only threat raining down from above. Some of the slightly wealthier houses, and certainly the large castles and manors, have built-in toilets called garderobes. The name sounds quite elegant, almost like a French closet for fine clothing, but the reality is far more brutal. A garderobe is little more than a small, drafty alcove with a wooden seat holding a hole in the middle. This hole opens directly into a long, hollow chute that drops straight down the outside wall of the building. If the building sits right on the edge of the River Thames, the waste simply plummets down and splashes directly into the drinking water. But many of these chutes do not empty into the river. They empty into deep, open pits, dug right in the backyards of the houses, or even worse, they empty straight out into narrow public alleyways. As you walk through these tight corridors, you might suddenly feel a cold, foul breeze blowing down from a hole in the stone wall above your head. It is a constant, terrifying reminder that you are never entirely safe, even when you think you are walking under a clear sky. The earth beneath London is quite literally suffocating under the pressure of all this waste. Deep beneath the muddy streets, massive public cesspits try to hold the daily refuse of tens of thousands of people. These pits are incredibly dangerous places, sometimes prone to collapsing entirely, swallowing up the ground and anyone standing nearby. Men known as gong farmers are paid very well to work in the dead of night, shoveling out these pits by candlelight. It is a deadly, suffocating job that no one else wants to do. But despite their best efforts, the city simply produces far too much waste for the medieval infrastructure to handle. You brush a bit of dirty water from your sleeve and let out a long, heavy sigh. You have survived the falling danger this time, but the morning commute has only just begun. The pale sun is finally starting to burn through the fog, rising just high enough to cast a dim, grey light over the chaotic streets. But as the air begins to warm up, even just a little bit, a new nightmare begins to awaken. The moisture trapped in the mud and the gutters begins to gently evaporate. And as it does, it lifts the most unbelievable, overpowering stench straight into the air, creating a solid wall of smell that you must now walk directly into. As the pale morning sun slowly climbs higher over the timber rooftops, the city begins to heat up. The gentle warmth is normally a comforting feeling, but here, in the cramped and filthy streets of medieval London, it is a curse. The warmth, bakes the damp earth, causing the moisture trapped in the mud to slowly turn into a thick, invisible steam. And with that steam comes the smell. It is a scent so powerful, so incredibly dense, that it almost feels solid, like a heavy woolen blanket thrown over your face. In this era, people truly believed that bad smells carried diseases, a concept they called miasma. And walking through this suffocating fog of odor, you can completely understand why they were so terrified of the air itself. You pull your cloak over your nose, trying to filter out the worst of it, but there is simply no escape. As you navigate deeper into the busy heart of the city, you enter a neighborhood known as the Shambles. This is the butcher's district. There are no shiny glass display cases here, and no health inspectors to ensure clean working conditions. Animals are herded directly from the countryside straight into the incredibly crowded streets. Cows, pigs, and sheep are slaughtered right out in the open, often right in front of the small wooden shops. The sound of frightened animals and shouting men echoes constantly off the narrow walls. You step very carefully, because the ground here is no longer just brown mud. It is stained a deep, dark red. Thick rivers of blood flow directly out of the slaughterhouses, pooling in the uneven dirt and slowly draining into the central street kennel. The butchers are supposed to dispose of the unusable parts of the animals in designated areas, but they rarely follow the rules. They simply throw the horns, hooves, intestines, and rotting offal straight out into the muddy alleyways. Massive swarms of black flies buzz loudly over the discarded remains, feasting in the morning heat. The coppery smell of blood mixed with the sweet, sickening scent of rotting meat is enough to make your stomach turn over completely. You walk a little faster, desperate to leave the Shambles behind, but the next street offers absolutely no relief. You have wandered into the tanner's district, the place where animal skins are turned into soft leather for boots and belts. If the butchers smelled bad, the tanners are a complete nightmare. To remove the hair from the animal, hides and make the leather soft, medieval tanners do not use gentle modern chemicals. They use a terrifying mixture of dog feces, rotting brains, and massive vats of stale human urine. People actually collect urine in pots to sell to the tanneries for this very purpose. The tanners stand waist deep in these foul, bubbling vats, stomping the skins with their bare feet all day long. The ammonia smell of the stale urine is so sharp and pungent that it physically burns the inside of your nose. It makes your eyes sting and water, blinding you momentarily as you try to stumble past the wooden workshops. The smell of the tanneries is so notoriously awful that these workers are usually forced to live on the very edges of the city, pushed away by the rest of the exhausted population. But the wind still carries their foul, stinging perfume right through the entire town. And beyond the butchers and the tanners, there is simply the everyday garbage of tens of thousands of people. Remember, there are no plastic trash bags, no metal bins, and no scheduled garbage trucks coming to sweep the streets clean. When a clay pot breaks, it is thrown out the window. When a cabbage goes rotten, it joins the pile in the street. Dead dogs and feral cats often lie in the gutters for days, completely ignored by the busy crowds rushing past them. The city is a giant, living compost heap, constantly generating heat, buzzing with insects, and releasing a cocktail of smells that simply defy modern description. By the time you finally make it through the narrow streets to your destination, your clothes have absorbed the terrible, thick miasma of the city. You feel a desperate, powerful urge to wash your face, to scrub your hands, and to drink something cold and clean, to wash the taste of soot and rot from your mouth. You hear the distant, rushing sound of the River Thames, and you think that perhaps water will be your salvation. You imagine a cool, refreshing drink and a moment to splash your face. But as you walk toward the riverbank, your throat dry and aching, you are about to discover that the water in medieval London is the most dangerous thing of all. You stand at the edge of the wooden docks, looking out over the wide expanse of the River Thames. In modern times, a river running through a city is often a beautiful, shimmering centerpiece, reflecting the bright lights of the skyline. But in medieval London, the Thames is not a scenic attraction. It is a massive, sluggish, working beast of a river. The water is not a clear, sparkling blue, but rather a murky, incredibly dark shade of brown. A thick, oily film seems to float on the surface, catching the pale morning light in a very unsettling way. You see, the Thames is the absolute lifeblood of the city, but it is also completely abused by it. Hundreds of small wooden boats, ferries, and massive trading ships crowd the water, constantly churning up the muddy bottom. The river acts as the city's main highway, moving heavy timber, stone, and people from one end of London to the other. But it also serves a much darker, far more dangerous purpose. The Thames is the ultimate destination for every single drop of waste produced by the crowded city behind you. Remember those narrow, muddy streets you just struggled through? Remember the central kennels filled with rotting cabbage, the blood from the butcher shops, and the foul runoff from the tanneries? All of those shallow, filthy gutters eventually slope downhill, draining directly into smaller rivers like the River Fleet or the Walbrook, and those smaller rivers all empty straight into the Thames. Furthermore, the public latrines built on bridges over the river drop human waste directly into the incredibly slow-moving currents. It is a concentrated, toxic soup of human and animal refuse, swirling gently against the wooden pylons of the docks. Knowing this, the idea of simply dipping a wooden cup into the river to quench your terrible thirst is entirely unthinkable. There are no water treatment plants here, no chemical filters, and no understanding of microscopic bacteria. To drink untreated water in medieval London is essentially playing a deadly game of chance. Water from the river, or even from shallow city wells, is frequently contaminated with invisible, deadly diseases like dysentery, typhoid, and cholera. People of the time do not know about germs, but they clearly understand cause and effect. They know that drinking raw water often leads to terrible stomach pains, violent illness, and very often a painful death. So, how do you survive in a bustling, exhausting city without drinking water? The answer is found in the hundreds of small, smoky breweries scattered throughout London. To safely hydrate, the entire population relies on alcohol. This is not because medieval people simply loved to party and be drunk all day. It is a matter of pure, desperate survival. The brewing process requires boiling the water, which silently and miraculously kills the deadly bacteria hiding inside it. The addition of grains and eventually hops creates a completely safe, stable liquid that can be stored in wooden barrels without rotting. However, you cannot spend your entire working day drinking strong, heavy tavern ale. Instead, the staple drink for everyone is something called small beer. Small beer is brewed using the leftover grains from the production of stronger ales. It has a very low alcohol content, usually less than 1 or 2%, just enough to keep the liquid preserved. It is incredibly cloudy, slightly sour, and thick, with floating bits of grain, providing a few extra calories to help you get through your hard manual labor. Because it is the only safe thing to drink, absolutely everyone consumes it. From the moment you wake up shivering in your straw bed, you drink small beer. You drink it out of a leather tankard or a rough wooden cup with your morning meal. You drink it while you work in the dusty shops, and you drink it before you go back to sleep in the dark. Even pregnant women, young children, and toddlers drinking from small wooden cups consume weak beer all day long. The entire population of London exists in a state of constant, mild dehydration, paired with a very slight, buzzing haze from the endless supply of weak alcohol. You hand a small copper coin to a street vendor and take a long, desperate gulp of the cloudy, sour liquid from a shared wooden bowl. It coats your tongue and barely satisfies your profound thirst, but it is better than dying from the river water. Now that your throat is no longer completely dry, a new sensation begins to take over. The heavy physical labor and the morning commute have left your stomach completely empty, rumbling loudly over the noise of the docks. It is time to find something to eat. But in a city without refrigeration, where the smell of rot hangs in the air, finding a safe and satisfying meal is going to be another dangerous adventure entirely. You turn away from the noisy, crowded docks, the taste of sour small beer still lingering on your tongue. Your stomach gives a loud, hollow growl that seems to echo in the damp morning air. In a modern city, you might simply pop into a bright, clean cafe for a warm pastry, or grab a sandwich neatly wrapped in plastic. But as you walk back into the labyrinth of narrow, shadowy streets, finding a safe and filling meal is a very different kind of challenge. The air here is filled with a chaotic mixture of smells. You can smell the sharp smoke of hundreds of wood fires, the lingering stench of the gutters, and underneath it all, the heavy, greasy scent of the medieval cookshops. When we imagine historical feasts, we picture massive tables groaning under the weight of whole roasted pigs, delicate birds, and mountains of sweet fruits. But for an ordinary worker standing in the mud of London, that kind of food is nothing but a distant fantasy. Your daily survival depends entirely on one single foundational ingredient: grain. Bread is the absolute center of the medieval diet. However, the bread you're about to buy is nothing like the soft, fluffy, bright white loaves you find in a modern supermarket. White wheat bread, known as manchesh, is incredibly expensive and reserved entirely for the wealthy nobility. Your bread is going to be dark, heavy, and punishingly dense. You step up to a baker's wooden stall and hand over a tiny copper coin. In return, you receive a heavy, rough loaf made from a mixture of rye, barley, and sometimes ground beans or peas. It is commonly called maslin bread. As you bite into it, your jaw immediately has to work incredibly hard. The crust is thick and tough, baked hard in a wood-fired oven. But the toughness is not the only problem you have to worry about. Because flour was so expensive, dishonest bakers frequently tried to stretch their profits by mixing terrible things into the dough. You chew slowly, hoping you do not crack a tooth on the small stones and grit left behind by the massive millstones that ground the grain. And if you are unlucky, you might even taste the dull, chalky flavor of actual sawdust or ground bone, secretly folded into the dough to make the loaf heavier. Surprisingly, this heavy, dark bread is not just your food. Very often, it is also your plate. Ordinary medieval people do not eat off fine porcelain or smooth glass. They use what is called a trencher. A trencher is simply a very thick slice of stale, 4-day-old bread, cut flat to serve as a base for your meal. You place your meat or your thick stew directly on top of this flat piece of hard bread. As you eat your meal, the stale bread slowly soaks up all the dark, greasy juices and the salty gravy. When you finish the main part of your meal, you then eat your delicious, gravy-soaked plate. If you're feeling particularly wealthy, or if the bread is simply too stale to chew, you might throw your used trencher to the dogs waiting by your feet, or give it to the desperate beggars sitting outside the city walls. But you cannot survive on tough bread alone. The true staple of the common medieval diet is a thick, gloomy dish called pottage. You can think of pottage as an eternal, never-ending stew. A large black iron cauldron hangs over the fire in almost every peasant home and local tavern. Inside this pot, water or weak ale is boiled along with whatever grains and vegetables happen to be available that day. Cabbage, leeks, onions and beans are all chopped up and thrown into the bubbling water. They are boiled fiercely for hours, long past the point of being tender, until everything breaks down into a thick, grey, mushy porridge. Day after day, new ingredients are simply tossed into the same pot, creating a meal that is hot, filling, and incredibly boring to look at. If you are craving something richer than boiled cabbage, you might bravely seek out some meat. But without refrigerators, freezers, or even chemical preservatives, eating meat in medieval London is a very dangerous gamble. Fresh meat rots incredibly fast in the damp, warm air of the city. To prevent a total loss of their expensive product, butchers and households preserve meat by packing it tightly in massive barrels of dry salt, or hanging it in chimneys to be deeply smoked. This process makes the meat safe, but it turns a beautiful cut of beef or pork into something resembling a hard, salty leather boot. You have to soak the salt meat in warm water for hours or even days before it is soft enough to even chop up and throw into your bubbling pottage. If you are too busy working in the filthy streets to cook your own meal, you might buy your lunch from a pie seller. This is the fast food of the Middle Ages, but it holds a very dark secret. The crust of a street pie is usually made thick and incredibly hard, acting more like a protective container than a tasty pastry. Inside, you will find a steaming mixture of dark meat and heavy gravy. But you must never ask the pie seller exactly what kind of meat is inside the crust. Unscrupulous cooks often bought the cheapest, oldest meat available, meat that was already starting to turn green and smell slightly sweet with rot. To hide the terrible taste and the smell of the decaying meat, they drowned the pie filling in sharp, burning mustard, heavy garlic, and cheap onions. Sometimes, if beef or pork was too expensive, stray cats and trapped pigeons found their way into the hot, greasy ovens of the pie shops. You simply eat it quickly, wash it down with a long drink of sour small beer, and try not to think about it too much. Perhaps you think a fresh, crisp salad would be a nice break from all this heavy, salty, boiled food. But in the Middle Ages, eating raw vegetables or fresh fruit is actually considered quite dangerous by medical experts. They strongly believe that raw fruit carries diseases, and that cold vegetables disrupt the delicate balance of the body's humors. Unless you pull an apple straight off a tree yourself, eating fresh produce that has been rolling around in the muddy, contaminated carts of the city market is a very quick way to get horribly sick. So, every single leaf of cabbage, every turnip, and every carrot is boiled into absolute submission before it ever touches your lips. There is no crunch, no vibrant green color, and very little natural flavor left behind. You finish the last bite of your tough muslin bread, swallowing heavily as it scratches the back of your dry throat. Your stomach is finally full, but it sits heavy and uncomfortable, like you have swallowed a cold stone. The medieval diet provides enough basic calories to keep you swinging a hammer or carrying heavy timber, but it offers absolutely zero comfort. Over the years, The constant grinding of the stone grit in the bread will slowly wear your teeth completely flat. The lack of vitamins from fresh fruits will leave your gums bleeding and your energy constantly depleted. Every meal is merely fuel for the machine, a harsh necessity to keep you breathing for one more difficult day in London. You wipe your greasy hands casually on your rough clothing and prepare to head back out into the chaotic, noisy street. But as you shift your weight, the coarse fabric of your shirt rubs violently against your tired shoulders. You reach up and aggressively scratch the back of your neck, a deeply familiar sensation that you experience all day, every day. Your stomach may finally be full, but the physical discomfort is only just moving to another part of your body. Because in this dark, filthy world, what you put inside your body is almost as agonizing as the heavy, itchy things you are forced to wear on the outside. As you reach up to scratch your tired neck, your fingers brush against the heavy collar of your tunic. In our modern lives, we are completely spoiled by the incredible luxury of soft fabrics. We wear breathable cotton, smooth silk, and stretchy synthetic blends that move effortlessly with our bodies. But in medieval London, soft clothing is a rare and expensive privilege reserved exclusively for the high nobility. For an ordinary worker like you, your wardrobe is built entirely for durability and survival rather than comfort. You are dressed in heavy, unyielding layers of dense linen and thick, incredibly coarse wool. The wool you wear is nothing like the refined, gentle merino wool of today. It is homespun, raw, and deeply scratchy. The manual spinning and weaving processes of the Middle Ages leave tiny, sharp fibers sticking out in every possible direction. When this heavy fabric rubs against your bare skin all day long, it feels as though you're wearing a suit made entirely of sandpaper. And because the dyes used are made from natural plants, bark, and roots, they fade very quickly in the harsh sun and the endless rain. Your clothes are not bright, vibrant, or cheerful. They are dull, muddy shades of brown, yellowish green, and a sad, faded grey that perfectly matches the cloudy sky above you. But the true nightmare of medieval clothing is not just how it feels, it is how you care for it. Or rather, how you do not care for it at all. If you own a heavy wool tunic or a thick winter cloak, you absolutely never, ever wash it. Soaking wool in hot water makes it shrink terribly, ruining the expensive garment forever. Furthermore, harsh soap strips away the natural animal oils that actually help keep the fabric waterproof against the constant, freezing English rain. So, instead of washing your outer clothes, you simply vigorously brush the dry mud off them at the end of the day. Imagine wearing the exact same heavy coat every single day for years, sweating in the summer heat, working in the bloody slaughterhouses, and walking through the filthy streets without it ever touching a single drop of soapy water. To protect your sensitive skin from the harsh wool, and to protect the expensive wool from your sweaty body, you wear an undergarment called a shift or a shirt. This base layer is made of plain, undyed linen. The linen acts exactly like a sponge, quietly soaking up all of your sweat, dead skin cells, and natural body oils throughout the long, exhausting working week. You do wash your linen undergarments, but laundry day in the Middle Ages is an absolutely back-breaking, deeply miserable task. There are no washing machines to gently spin your clothes perfectly clean. Instead, the soiled linen is heavily soaked in a massive wooden tub filled with a caustic, burning liquid called lye. And how do they make this powerful cleaning solution? By mixing white wood ash with gallons of stale, fermented human urine. The strong ammonia in the stale urine acts as a powerful bleaching agent. breaking down the heavy grease and deep dirt trapped inside the linen fibers. Women spend hours standing over these steaming, foul-smelling vats, using heavy wooden paddles to violently pound the wet fabric. Then, the heavy, soaking wet clothes are hauled all the way down to the freezing waters of the River Thames, to be brutally wrung out by hand and beaten against smooth river rocks. Your linen shirt may come back to you looking somewhat clean, but it often carries the faint, lingering, sour smell of the entire washing process. And because you only own one, or perhaps two of these shirts, you must wear them for days or even weeks at a time before they ever see the terrible laundry tub again. This heavy, unwashed clothing tightly wraps a body that is rarely, if ever, fully clean. There is a popular modern myth that medieval people never bathed at all, and while that is an exaggeration, taking a full hot bath was an incredibly rare and exhausting event. To take a proper bath, someone has to walk to the nearest public well or the muddy river, carry heavy wooden buckets of water all the way back to the house, and heat them slowly, one by one, over a smoky indoor fire. It takes hours of hard manual labor and precious expensive firewood just to fill a shallow wooden tub. Because of this massive physical and financial effort, when a family finally prepares a bath, absolutely everyone uses the exact same water. The father bathes first, followed by the mother, then the older children, and finally the smallest babies. By the time the last person steps into the wooden tub, the water is completely cold, dark grey, and thick with floating dirt. If heating water at home was simply too difficult, there were public bathhouses known as the stews. They were mostly located directly across the river in a chaotic, rowdy district called Southwark. For a small fee, you could sit in a large wooden tub filled with hot water and sweet-smelling herbs. It sounds like a relaxing medieval spa day, but in reality, the stews were extremely dangerous places to visit. Because men and women often bathed closely together, and the strict rules of polite society were entirely ignored in the steamy rooms, the bathhouses quickly became associated with illegal gambling, heavy drinking, and dangerous brothels. Even worse, sitting in shared warm water with dozens of unwashed strangers meant you were highly likely to catch whatever terrible skin diseases the person sitting right next to you was carrying. So, for a respectable, hard-working person, the safest option was usually to just stay home and stay dirty. Because full baths were so rare, you simply wipe your face and hands with a damp rag in the freezing morning air. This leaves a permanent, invisible layer of dried sweat, old grime, and dirty street dust clinging tightly to your skin, hidden just beneath your heavy linen shift. In the close, suffocating quarters of the crowded city, the collective body odor of tens of thousands of unwashed people simply becomes the natural background scent of daily human existence. You stop noticing how bad your tired neighbors smell, because you smell exactly the same way. But your poor skin definitely notices the lack of care. Without regular cleaning, minor scrapes and small cuts quickly become red and dangerously infected. Fungal rashes bloom silently in the dark, sweaty creases of your body, creating a terrible burning itch that you can never quite satisfy, no matter how hard you scratch. And worst of all, the deep folds and thick, rough seams of your woolen clothing provide the absolute perfect hiding place for body lice. These tiny, terrifying parasites lay their eggs deep in the coarse fibers, safely protected from the bitter cold outside. In the quiet evenings, families actually sit closely together around the dim, fading glow of the fire, turning their heavy clothes inside out. They use the flickering candlelight to meticulously hunt for the lice, picking them out one by hand. They throw the tiny bugs into the flames, listening carefully for the sharp, satisfying popping sound as they burn. It is a mindless, repetitive, and deeply depressing evening chore. No matter how many you manage to kill tonight, you know perfectly well that a dozen more will be crawling across your skin by tomorrow afternoon. You pull your coarse woolen cloak a little tighter around your shoulders, trying desperately to ignore the angry red bug bites covering your arms and chest. The relentless combination of heavy, unwashed clothes, terrible, hollow food, and freezing damp air takes a massive, devastating toll on the human body. Your immune system is constantly fighting a desperate, invisible war against the filthy environment surrounding you, and inevitably, sooner or later, that fragile defense will completely fail. You will catch a burning fever, or develop a nasty, rattling cough, or suddenly notice a strange, painful swelling somewhere on your skin. And when that terrifying moment finally happens, you will have no choice but to seek medical help. But in a dark world, where doctors use astrology to diagnose a stomachache and bloodthirsty leeches to cure a headache, falling ill might just be the most frightening experience of all. It starts with a simple scratch in the back of your throat, or a sudden burning ache deep in your chest. In our modern world, feeling unwell is certainly an inconvenience, but it is rarely a reason to panic. We have clean pharmacies filled with rows of brightly colored pills, powerful antibiotics, and soothing cough syrups. But in the dark, damp streets of medieval London, noticing the first signs of illness brings a creeping, icy terror into your heart. Because falling sick means you must cross paths with the terrifying, deeply bizarre world of medieval medicine. There are no scientific laboratories here, no sterile hospitals, and absolutely no understanding of how the human body actually works. To understand how a medieval doctor thinks, you have to forget everything you know about biology. The entire medical system is based on an ancient Greek idea called the four humours. They believe that your body is a fragile container filled with four invisible, powerful liquids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to the most educated men of the time, perfect health means these four liquids are sitting in absolute peaceful balance. If you have a fever, a bad cough, or a painful rash, it simply means one of your humours has become too full and is spilling over. The doctor's entire job is not to fight a virus, but to aggressively force your body back into balance by draining the excess liquid right out of you. If you can actually afford to hire a trained physician, which most ordinary workers cannot, his visit is a very strange performance. He will likely arrive dressed in heavy, expensive robes, looking very serious and wise. But he probably will not even touch your hot, sweaty forehead. He considers physical contact to be beneath his high education. Instead, his most important diagnostic tool is a small glass flask filled with your morning urine. He will hold it up to the dim candlelight, carefully examining the exact shade of yellow or brown. He will swirl it gently to check its thickness. And if he is a truly dedicated professional, he will actually take a small, hesitant sip to see if it tastes sweet or bitter. After tasting your urine, the physician does not look at a medical textbook. He looks up at the sky. Medieval medicine is entirely tangled up with astrology. The doctor pulls out a complex chart to check the exact alignment of the planets and the current phase of the moon. He believes that your body parts are ruled by the stars, and that doing a medical procedure on the wrong day could anger the heavens and instantly kill you. Once he has consulted the stars and diagnosed that you simply have far too much blood in your system, he writes his prescription. And the prescription is almost always exactly the same. You need to bleed. Since the wealthy physician refuses to do the messy physical work himself, he calls in a completely different kind of professional to perform the treatment. This is the barber surgeon. Today, a barber just gives you a nice haircut and a clean shave. But in medieval London, the local barber is also the surgeon, the dentist, and the man who eagerly cuts your veins wide open. You can spot his shop on the muddy street by looking for a tall wooden pole painted with twisting stripes of red and white. The white represents the bandages, and the red represents the blood he proudly spills every single day. The barber surgeon arrives at your bedside with a brass bowl and a small, incredibly sharp iron blade called a lancet. There is absolutely no anesthetic, no numbing cream, and no sterile alcohol to clean the skin. He simply finds a thick blue vein on your tired arm, slices it open with a quick, painful flick of his unwashed wrist, and lets the dark red blood pour freely into the bowl. You lie back against your scratchy straw pillow, watching your life slowly drain away into a metal dish. He lets it run till you feel dizzy, incredibly weak, and completely faint. Only then does he wrap a dirty linen bandage tightly around your arm to stop the flow, completely convinced he has just cured your fever. If a sharp knife feels a bit too violent for your tastes, there is a slightly gentler, but far more disturbing way to bleed. The doctor might prescribe leeches. The barber surgeon reaches into a wet leather pouch and pulls out several fat, black, squirming worms. He carefully places the cold, slimy creatures directly onto your hot skin, right over the area that hurts the most. You feel a tiny, sharp pinch as their circular rows of teeth slice into your flesh, injecting a chemical that stops your blood from clotting. And then, you simply lie quietly in the dark room, listening to the soft, wet sound of the leeches drinking from you. You watch them slowly swell up like dark red grapes against your pale skin, until they are completely full and roll off lazily onto your sheets. If your illness is a rotting, agonizing toothache rather than a fever, your visit to the barber surgeon is even more terrifying. You walk into his shop, the floorboards sticky with old blood, and sit in a hard wooden chair. To deal with a bad tooth, the medieval solution is simply brutal extraction. The barber takes a heavy gulp of strong wine to steady his own nerves, and offers the bottle to you to help drown the impending panic. Then he takes a pair of massive, terrifying iron pliers, commonly known as a tooth key. He forces them into your mouth, grips the rotting tooth, and pulls with all of his physical strength. The horrific crunch of breaking bone echoes loudly in your ears, a blinding flash of white-hot pain shooting through your skull as he rips the tooth right out of your jaw. Beyond bleeding and pulling teeth, there is an entire world of deeply unappetizing medicines sold by local apothecaries. If you visit one of these dark, dusty shops, you will not find neatly packaged boxes of medicine. You will find glass jars filled with things that look more like a witch's spell than a medical cure. To cure a stomachache, you might be given a potion made of crushed beetles, dried fox lungs, and roasted snail shells. If you're very wealthy, you might consume a powder made of ground-up Egyptian mummies, believed to hold incredible healing magic. You force these terrible gritty mixtures down your throat, gagging on the taste of dirt and dried blood, desperately hoping they will somehow make you feel better. The tragic reality of medieval medicine is that the treatments almost always make you much, much worse. Instead of resting and gaining strength, Your body is completely drained of blood, dehydrated, and forced to process toxic, bizarre ingredients. You are left exhausted, shivering, and incredibly weak. As the barber surgeon finally packs up his bloody tools and leaves your cold, drafty room, you collapse back onto your itchy straw mattress. You close your heavy eyes, craving absolute silence, so your battered body can finally try to heal itself in peace. But as you lie there perfectly still in the growing darkness, you hear a new sound. It is a soft, rapid scratching noise, coming directly from inside the wooden walls near your head. The city is full of uninvited guests, and they have absolutely no respect for the sick. As you lie perfectly still in the stifling, claustrophobic darkness of your freezing room, your bruised and battered body begging for sleep, you hear it again. It is a dry, rapid scratching sound, echoing hollowly from somewhere deep inside the plaster and timber walls right next to your head. You might try to convince your exhausted mind that it's just the old wooden beams settling in the cold night air, or perhaps the wind rattling a loose clay tile on the roof. But deep down, in the very pit of your stomach, you know exactly what is making that terrifying, relentless noise. You are not alone in the dark. You are sharing your tiny, drafty home with the true, undisputed rulers of medieval London, the endless, sprawling armies of rats. In a clean, well-lit modern home, seeing a single tiny mouse is enough to call a professional exterminator and completely panic. But in the dark ages of the 14th century, rodents are simply an unavoidable, deeply depressing fact of daily human existence. The black rat, a nimble, aggressive, and incredibly bold creature, absolutely thrives in this densely packed, filthy urban environment. And honestly, why wouldn't they? We have already walked through the mountains of rotting garbage piling up in the narrow, muddy streets, the bloody offal tossed out blindly by the careless butchers, and the endless, unguarded supply of stale bread and spilled grain. For a hungry rat, the crowded streets of medieval London are an absolutely glorious, never-ending banquet of decay. Furthermore, the fragile, crumbling architecture of the city seems almost deliberately designed perfectly for their comfort and breeding. The houses are hastily constructed using a primitive method called wattle and daub, which is essentially woven wooden sticks thickly smeared with a mixture of wet clay, coarse animal hair, and sour cow dung. As this crude material dries out and ages over the years, it slowly cracks and crumbles, creating thousands of perfect hidden tunnels and warm, dark nesting cavities directly inside your walls. The heavy thatched roofs made of dry river reeds provide a thick, insulated paradise for generations of rodent families. They scurry confidently across the heavy wooden rafters directly above your resting face, their tiny, sharp claws making a terrifying, clicking symphony in the dead of night. Sometimes, a heavy, overfed rat loses its footing in the pitch black, dropping suddenly with a soft, sickening thud directly onto your scratchy woolen blanket. When this happens, you do not scream or jump out of bed. You simply kick your heavy legs violently to scare the creature away, pull the coarse wool tighter around your chin to protect your neck, and desperately try to go back to sleep. You simply cannot waste your precious, limited physical energy fighting a war that you cannot possibly win. There are dozens of them for every single exhausted human in the city. They boldly chew right through your thick leather boots while you sleep. They aggressively tear open thick canvas sacks of incredibly expensive flour in the bakeries, and they fearlessly steal food straight from the heavy wooden dining tables while you are sitting right there. They are a terrible, disgusting nuisance. But the ordinary people of London do not truly understand just how profoundly dangerous these furry, scurrying shadows really are. The true danger they bring is entirely invisible to the naked human eye. Hidden deep within the greasy, coarse fur of these millions of rats are billions of tiny, incredibly hungry fleas. And these jumping parasites carry a silent, microscopic bacterial cargo that will bring the entire medieval world to its knees in absolute agony. When people think of the Middle Ages, they inevitably, immediately think of the Black Death. It is the ultimate, creeping terror that hangs heavy over the city. A dark, suffocating cloud of paranoia that never, ever truly goes away. News travels incredibly slowly in this era, passed along only by exhausted traveling merchants and frightened, weather-beaten sailors arriving at the muddy docks of the River Thames. These travelers bring whispered, terrifying rumors of ghost ships floating aimlessly in the sea with no living crew, and massive crowded cities in mainland Europe being completely wiped off the map in a matter of weeks. When the plague finally reaches the gates of London, it does not announce itself with a conquering army or the loud, proud blast of a royal trumpet. It arrives in total silence, carried by a single, tiny flea, jumping casually from the back of a dying rat directly onto the dirty ankle of an unsuspecting dock worker. A tiny, sharp bite is all it takes to end a life. The deadly bacterium enters the human bloodstream, and the terrifying, irreversible countdown officially begins. The deeply rooted fear of this invisible killer creates an atmosphere of absolute, crushing anxiety that you must carry with you every single day of your life. Because once the violent sickness actually takes hold, there is absolutely no cure. And the wealthy doctors with their complex astrology charts and their bloody leeches are completely, utterly useless against it. In fact, the physicians are usually the very first ones to pack their bags and flee the city in pure terror, abandoning the sick to their gruesome fate. The sickness begins with a sudden, violent fever that leaves you uncontrollably shivering under your thin, damp blankets. Then, the terrifying, agonizing swellings painfully appear in the armpits, the neck and the groin, swelling incredibly fast to the size of hard apples, and turning a sickening dark purple-black. These are the dreaded buboes, the painful, undeniable mark of the bubonic plague. The disease moves with a terrifying, merciless speed, very often taking a healthy, strong adult from their very first minor headache to a quiet, muddy grave in less than 4 short, agonizing days. When the Great Plague truly sweeps through the narrow, crowded streets of London, the entire fabric of human society completely unravels. The sheer, unimaginable volume of daily death is impossible for the modern, protected mind to comprehend. The heavy church bells ring so constantly, day and night, announcing the passing of lost souls, that eventually the desperate city mayor orders them to stop completely, just to spare the terrified living from the endless, maddening noise. The small local graveyards behind the stone churches quickly fill to the very top, the consecrated earth literally bursting open with the dead. Massive, deep trenches have to be quickly dug in the muddy, cold fields outside the city walls, where bodies are stacked brutally on top of each other, like chopped firewood, thrown into the dirt without ceremony, without names, and without wooden coffins. The psychological toll of living under this constant, looming threat of absolute annihilation is incredibly heavy on the human soul. You begin to look at your friendly neighbors completely differently, with deep suspicion in your eyes. You look at your own beloved family differently, quietly and desperately wondering who will be the next to show a sudden burning fever or a slight cough. You avoid the bustling, crowded markets whenever rumors of sickness spread, nervously crossing the muddy street to avoid walking too close to a coughing stranger. Families are locked directly inside their own homes at the very first sign of illness, a red cross painted hastily on their wooden door, leaving them to die together in the suffocating dark. Even when the great, devastating outbreaks fade away into the freezing winter months, the disease never truly disappears. It simply retreats and hides in the shadows, waiting patiently in the dark corners of the wattle and daub walls, carried by the tiny, scratching companions you hear in the night. You take a slow, deeply trembling breath, pulling your coarse linen shift tight across your heavily beating chest. You forcefully try to push the terrifying, morbid thoughts of the Great Plague out of your exhausted, racing mind. You tell yourself over and over that tonight you are only dealing with a minor, normal fever, and that the bloody leeches the barber placed on your arm earlier will surely do their healing job. You close your eyes incredibly tightly, absolutely desperate for just 1 hour of peaceful, uninterrupted silence. But as the pitch-black night slowly begins to lift, and a pale, watery grey dawn approaches the shivering city, you quickly realize that peace is entirely impossible here. The rats may finally go to sleep as the pale sun comes up, but the waking city is about to assault your tired senses all over again. Because medieval London is not just incredibly smelly, filthy, and deeply dangerous, it is also unimaginably, violently loud. As the pale, watery light of dawn finally begins to bleed through the cracks in your wooden window shutters, the absolute terror of the long, dark night starts to slowly fade away. You might foolishly hope that the morning will bring a sense of calm, a quiet moment to drink your sour small beer and mentally prepare for another exhausting day of survival. But medieval London does not wake up gently. It does not stretch and yawn in the quiet morning dew. It violently explodes into life, assaulting your ears with a level of noise that is completely unimaginable to the modern mind. Before the sun has even fully cleared the heavy stone walls of the city, the very first assault begins from the sky. Today, we might hear the distant, muffled hum of highway traffic, or the gentle beep of a digital alarm clock. But in the 14th century, the city is entirely dominated by the deafening roar of the church bells. London is packed tightly, with over 100 individual parish churches, all squeezed together within a single square mile. And these massive bronze bells do not just politely chime on the hour. They ring constantly, fiercely, and completely out of sync with one another. They ring to announce the early morning prayers. They ring continuously to mourn the dead. They ring to warn of distant fires. And they ring simply to tell the exhausted labourers that their grueling shift has officially begun. The massive sound waves bounce aggressively off the leaning wooden rooftops, creating a deep, vibrating thunder that physically shakes the very dust from your wattle and daub ceiling. Once the bells give the signal, the streets below your window instantly turn into a chaotic, screaming battlefield of commerce. In a modern city, shops have bright neon signs and colourful painted billboards to attract your attention. But in a world where the vast majority of the population cannot read a single word, businesses have to rely entirely on the sheer volume of their lungs. Every single merchant, street vendor, and young apprentice stands completely outside their wooden stalls, screaming at the top of their voices to grab the attention of the passing crowds. They yell their traditional catchphrases over and over again, chanting aggressively, "What do you lack? What do you lack? Come buy." The bakers shout about their hot bread, the fishmongers scream about the morning catch, and the pie sellers bellow over the noise of it all. It is a desperate, endless shouting match that creates a solid wall of human noise, echoing painfully down the narrow, tunnel-like alleyways. And underneath the screaming of the merchants is the harsh, relentless, mechanical grinding of a medieval city at work. There are no rubber tires to soften the blow of transportation, and no smooth asphalt to absorb the heavy vibrations. Every single massive wooden cart is fitted with thick, heavy iron rims to protect the wheels from the terrible mud and the jagged cobblestones. When these massive, fully loaded carts are pulled through the streets by straining, panicked horses wearing heavy iron shoes, the noise is absolutely bone-shattering. It is a loud, rhythmic clattering and smashing sound that makes it completely impossible to hold a normal conversation, even with someone standing right next to you. You have to literally scream into your neighbor's ear just to be heard over the passing traffic. To make matters worse, there are absolutely no zoning laws to separate industrial factories from quiet residential neighborhoods. Your bedroom might share a very thin, poorly insulated wooden wall with an active blacksmith's forge. From the moment the sun comes up, you are subjected to the deafening, sharp ringing of a heavy iron hammer, violently striking an iron anvil, over and over and over again. A few doors down, a cooper is forcefully hammering wooden barrels together, while a carpenter loudly saws through thick oak planks right out in the open street. The entire city is a massive, incredibly loud workshop, and there is no escape from the endless industrial pounding. It hammers away at your exhausted brain, making any headache or mild fever feel 10 times worse than it actually is. But the symphony of chaos is not just made of iron, wood, and shouting humans. You must also remember that medieval London is essentially a massive, filthy farm, crammed directly inside a stone fortress. The streets are absolutely packed with nervous, noisy livestock. Huge flocks of panicked sheep bleat loudly as they are herded by aggressive, barking dogs right through the very center of the town. Feral pigs squeal and fight viciously over rotting cabbage leaves in the central street kennels. Thousands of trapped chickens cluck frantically in small wooden cages, while massive, angry cows low deeply as they are pushed toward the bloody butchers in the Shambles. The air is filled with the sounds of animal panic, adding a deeply unsettling, chaotic layer to the already deafening human uproar. Modern cities are actually built to quietly absorb sound. We have tall glass windows, soft carpets, insulated drywall, and trees planted along wide, open sidewalks. But in medieval London, every single surface is incredibly hard and completely unforgiving. The sound waves crash brutally against the dense timber, the hard plaster, and the heavy stone walls, violently bouncing back and forth across the narrow gaps between the leaning houses. The noise does not float away into the open sky. It becomes trapped down in the mud with you, swirling around your ears in a dizzying, suffocating tornado of sound. It leaves your ears ringing constantly, a dull, aching hum that follows you everywhere you go, from the muddy docks of the Thames all the way back to your freezing, drafty room. The relentless, inescapable noise takes a massive psychological toll on the population. There is simply no concept of peace and quiet anywhere inside the city walls. You cannot relax and read a book in a silent park. You cannot meditate, and you certainly cannot rest properly to recover from the terrible physical labor of your day. The sensory overload is completely exhausting, draining whatever tiny reserves of energy you had left after dealing with the terrible food, the freezing cold, and the itchy, heavy clothing. You exist in a state of permanent, vibrating stress. your nerves constantly frayed right to the very edge by the deafening symphony of a city that never stops screaming. The noise finally reaches a frantic, desperate fever pitch, just as the afternoon begins to fade. The merchants shout even louder, trying to sell the last of their rotting fish before the dark sets in. The iron-wheeled carts rush frantically toward the heavy stone gates of the city, desperate to leave before they are locked completely tight for the night. And then, as the pale sun dips incredibly low over the crooked wooden rooftops, a new, very specific sound rings out over the chaos. It is the deep, solemn tolling of the curfew bell. This bell signals the official end of the working day, ordering all fires to be covered and all honest citizens to return to their homes. As the deafening noise of the day finally begins to slowly die down, an entirely new, far more terrifying reality begins to take its place. Because as awful as the chaotic, roaring daytime is, the absolute pitch-black terror of a medieval night is about to begin. The deep, heavy tolling of the curfew bell echoes across the crooked wooden rooftops, a solemn warning that completely changes the rhythm of the city. The word curfew itself comes from an old French phrase, couvre-feu, which simply means to cover the fire. As the massive bell rings out, every honest citizen is commanded by law to bury their glowing hearth fires under a thick layer of cold ashes. It is a desperate, necessary rule to prevent the sleeping wooden city from burning to the ground. But it has a very chilling side effect. As the warm fires are forcefully smothered, the last remaining sources of light are completely extinguished. The pale sun has already slipped away, and now a deep, suffocating darkness begins to slowly swallow medieval London whole. In our modern world, we truly do not understand what real darkness looks like. Even in the middle of the night, our cities are bathed in a permanent, glowing halo of artificial light. We have bright orange street lamps on every single corner, glowing neon signs blinking softly in the distance, and the sweeping white headlights of passing cars. If you wake up at 3 in the morning today, you can still easily see the outline of the furniture in your bedroom. But in the 14th century, there is absolutely no light pollution. There are no public streetlights of any kind. When the heavy clouds roll in from the River Thames, blocking the pale silver light of the moon, the darkness is absolute, complete, and utterly terrifying. It is a pitch-black void that you cannot see your own hand moving in front of your face. As this absolute blackness falls, the familiar geography of the city completely disappears. The narrow, winding street that you walk down every single morning suddenly turns into an incredibly dangerous alien landscape. If you dared to step outside your heavy wooden door, every single step would be a massive physical risk. Without any light to guide your boots, you cannot see the deep, slippery puddles of rotting mud. You cannot see the open, shallow trenches of the street kennels, completely filled with slippery butchered bones and filthy water. And you certainly cannot see the heavy wooden carts or the piles of discarded garbage carelessly left in the middle of the alleyways. Walking just a few hundred feet in the dark could easily result in a broken ankle, a terrible fall into raw sewage, or a fatal blow to the head against a low-hanging wooden beam. But the physical dangers of tripping in the dark are absolutely nothing compared to the psychological terror that the night brings. You must remember that medieval people view the world through a deeply superstitious, intensely fearful lens. They do not view the darkness as simply an empty space waiting for the sun to return. They truly believe that the dark is heavily populated by dark forces. When the holy light of day fades away, The shadows become the playground for malicious demons, restless angry ghosts, and dangerous lurking witches. The howling of a stray dog or the sudden shriek of a barn owl is not just an animal noise. It is viewed as a terrifying supernatural omen, a dark warning sent directly from the devil himself. The absolute lack of scientific understanding makes the night a time of profound, inescapable paranoia. Because of this intense physical and spiritual fear, the moment the curfew bell stops ringing, the streets completely empty out. No decent, hard-working citizen would ever choose to be outside after dark. You rush inside your small, freezing home and immediately pull the heavy iron bolt across your solid wooden door. You close the wooden shutters over your unglazed windows, locking them tightly from the inside to block out the cold wind and the terrifying night. By trying to keep the dark out, you effectively lock yourself inside a tiny, drafty wooden box. The claustrophobia we talked about during the day becomes infinitely worse at night as you lie completely trapped in the pitch black, listening to the horrifying scratching of the rats inside the walls. The societal rules of the time strongly reinforce this absolute isolation. In many medieval cities, it is actually a strict legal offense to be walking the streets after the curfew bell without carrying a bright, burning torch or a proper candle lantern. The logic of the city leaders is incredibly simple and entirely unforgiving. If you're walking around in the dark without a light, you are clearly trying to hide. And if you are trying to hide, you must be a dangerous criminal, a thief, or a murderer. Anyone found wandering the pitch-black alleyways by the local authorities is immediately assumed to be guilty of something terrible, and they are quickly thrown into a freezing, filthy prison cell to await a very harsh morning judgment. So, you lie still in your scratchy straw bed, absolutely exhausted from the deafening noise and the back-breaking labor of the day, yet completely unable to relax in the terrifying dark. The complete absence of visual input makes your hearing incredibly sharp, and every tiny noise is painfully magnified. You listen intently to the silence outside, praying for a quiet night. But you know that the city is never truly asleep, because while the honest bakers, the tired blacksmiths, and the exhausted laborers are locked safely behind their heavy wooden doors, the absolute worst elements of human society are just waking up. The night does not belong to the king, it does not belong to the mayor, and it certainly does not belong to the church. The pitch-black streets of medieval London belong entirely to the desperate, the violent, and the cruel. As you pull the coarse woolen blanket tightly up over your ears, desperately trying to block out the unsettling sounds of the night, you hear something that makes your blood run completely cold. It is the incredibly soft, slow sound of heavy footsteps creeping directly past your thin wooden wall, followed by a low, muffled whisper. You hold your breath, your heart hammering painfully against your ribs, praying silently that whoever is out there will simply keep walking. Because out there in the absolute, blinding dark, the city watch is completely useless, and the vicious shadows are waiting patiently for anyone foolish enough to unlock their door. You lie frozen in your bed, your breath caught completely in your throat, as those soft, heavy footsteps slowly fade away down the muddy alley. In our modern world, if someone tries to break into your home, or if you feel threatened in the dark, you can simply reach for your glowing telephone. You dial a quick number, and within a few short minutes, trained police officers arrive with bright flashing lights, loud sirens, and protective gear. But in the terrifying darkness of medieval London, there is absolutely no telephone, and there is certainly no modern police force waiting to save you. When the heavy wooden doors of the city are locked tight at curfew, You are completely and utterly on your own. Now, the wealthy city leaders do try to maintain a very basic illusion of safety. They employ a small, dismally paid group of men known as the Night Watch. You might imagine them as brave, strong soldiers patrolling the streets with sharp swords and heavy armor, keeping the honest citizens safe while they sleep. But the reality is almost comically sad. The Night Watch is usually made up of very old, deeply tired men who simply cannot do heavy physical labor during the daytime. They are given incredibly poor wages, and their only equipment is a long wooden stick with a metal blade on the end, and a very dim flickering candle lantern that barely casts any light at all into the thick fog. In fact, the Night Watch is actually much more helpful to the violent criminals than to the innocent victims. As these old men slowly walk their assigned routes through the freezing, pitch-black streets, they are strictly required to ring a loud iron bell and repeatedly shout the current hour. They cry out, 12 o'clock on a quiet night, their raspy voices echoing off the crooked wooden walls. The city leaders believe this loud, continuous noise will frighten the thieves away. But in reality, they are essentially walking around with a massive, noisy warning system. Any intelligent criminal simply hears the bell ringing from 3 streets away, quietly steps backwards into a deep, dark shadow, waits for the slow watchman to pass completely by, and then goes right back to their illegal work. And the thieves of medieval London are incredibly clever and deeply, violently desperate. They are commonly known as footpads. The name is terrifyingly accurate and perfectly describes how they hunt. To avoid making any sound at all on the rough cobblestones and the hard, frozen mud, these men literally pad their feet. They wrap their heavy leather boots in thick layers of dirty cloth, old rags, and soft, unwashed wool. Because of this clever trick, they make absolutely no noise as they move through the dark. They are nothing but silent, invisible ghosts hunting in a maze of incredibly narrow wooden tunnels. They wait patiently in the pitch-black entrances of the narrowest alleys, holding rusty iron daggers, heavily weighted wooden clubs, or simply a thick piece of strong rope. If you're foolish or unlucky enough to be caught outside your home after the curfew bell, you will never even hear them coming. They strike violently from the darkness, pulling you down heavily into the terrible mud before you can even open your mouth to scream for help. And what makes this medieval crime so deeply unsettling is the profound, heartbreaking desperation behind it. These silent footpads are not trying to steal expensive diamond rings, fine silver, or golden watches. They will happily murder you in the freezing rain just to steal the heavy wool cloak right off your back. They will silently cut your throat for a worn leather belt, a pair of decent shoes, or a small canvas bag containing a few stale crusts of dark muslin bread. Life in this dark era is incredibly cheap, and basic, brutal survival is always worth killing for. If a terrible crime does happen in the dark, there are absolutely no highly trained detectives to solve it the next morning. There is no fingerprint dusting, no bright crime scene tape, and no modern security cameras looking down from the tall rooftops. The deep, incredibly fast-moving water of the River Thames is the perfect, silent accomplice for any nighttime murderer. A heavy body thrown completely out of sight from the wooden docks in the dead of night simply disappears forever, washed violently out toward the sea before the pale sun even begins to rise. If you vanish in medieval London, you are simply gone. Your terrified family will never truly know what happened in the dark, and the silent footpads will simply melt right back into the crowded, chaotic, noisy city the very next day, entirely unpunished. Knowing this terrifying reality, You try to press yourself deeper into your scratchy straw mattress, seeking any kind of comfort inside your locked home. But even inside, safely behind your heavy, bolted wooden door, you are never completely safe from the desperate shadows outside. Remember the incredibly cheap, fragile wattle and door balls of your house that the rats love so much? The mixture of woven sticks, dry mud and animal hair is very good at keeping the cold wind out, but it is incredibly weak against a determined, hungry thief. In this era, the legal term for breaking and entering is absolutely literal. Thieves rarely bother trying to pick the heavy, complex iron lock on your thick wooden door. Instead, they simply take a sharp iron tool and quietly, patiently dig a hole directly through the soft, crumbling mud wall of your house while you are sleeping. Imagine the absolute horror of lying perfectly still in the dark, hearing the soft, scratching sound of a metal blade slowly carving through the dry plaster right next to your head. You cannot see the intruder, and you do not know if they are alone. You only have a heavy wooden stick or a small utility knife to defend yourself in the pitch black. This terrifying method of burglary is incredibly common, and it adds an entire new layer of suffocating anxiety to your long, restless night. The walls of your home are meant to be your absolute only shield against the brutal medieval world, but in reality, they are as fragile and crumbling as dried leaves. You lie awake for hours, your tired eyes staring blindly into the black void, listening intensely to every single scrape, every gust of wind, and every distant sound. Surviving a medieval night requires absolute vigilance, a constant, deeply draining state of paranoia that leaves you mentally shattered by the time the church bells finally ring for morning. But as terrifying as the footpads and the wall-breaking thieves truly are, they are only flesh and blood. They can be fought, or they can be outsmarted. However, as you finally start to drift into a light, nervous sleep, your nose suddenly catches a very faint, incredibly sharp scent lingering in the cold, damp air. It is not the smell of the muddy gutters or the foul tanneries, but something far, far more dangerous. It is the unmistakable smell of fresh smoke, and in a crowded city made entirely of dry timber and straw, it is the absolute ultimate nightmare. You are hovering right on the very fragile edge of sleep, your exhausted mind finally surrendering to the heavy darkness of your drafty room. But suddenly, your tired eyes snap wide open. Your heart begins to hammer wildly against your ribs, completely drowning out the faint scratching sounds of the rats hidden inside your walls. You haven't heard the soft, creeping step of a footpad outside, and the massive church bells are mercifully silent. What woke you so suddenly from the dark is something far more primal and far more terrifying. It is a scent, just a tiny sharp whisper of a scent, slipping silently through the cracks in your heavy wooden shutters. It is the unmistakable, bitter, burning smell of fresh wood smoke. In our modern, concrete world, smelling smoke at night might just make you check the batteries in a plastic smoke detector on your ceiling. But in medieval London, that exact same smell is more than enough to make the blood completely freeze in your veins. Because the entire city you live in, every single house, shop, bakery, and crowded tavern, is essentially a massive, unbelievably dense pile of dry kindling, just waiting for a single careless spark. You must remember exactly what your fragile world is built of. Your house is heavily constructed from old timber beams that have baked dry in the summer sun for decades. The crumbly walls are filled with woven sticks and dried mud, and the towering roof directly above your sleeping head is made entirely of thick, tightly packed river straw. To make these wooden roofs waterproof, builders often cover them completely in thick black pitch, a tar-like substance that is incredibly violently flammable. And this giant tinderbox of a city is not spread out nicely over peaceful, wide green fields. We talked earlier about the incredibly claustrophobic, tunnel-like streets, and how the wooden houses lean so far forward that the rooftops almost touch each other. This specific architectural style is an absolute, unavoidable death sentence when a terrible fire breaks out. A medieval fire does not just stay politely in one place. It aggressively climbs up the dry wooden walls like a living, breathing, starving monster. When the roaring flames finally reach the top of a leaning house, they do not even have to jump. They simply crawl straight across the narrow gap in the dark alleyway, instantly catching the helpless neighbor's thatched roof on fire. A single burning room on a crowded street can easily transform an entire sleeping neighborhood into a roaring, unstoppable ocean of orange flames in a matter of terrifying minutes. And starting a devastating fire in the Middle Ages is incredibly, tragically easy. Remember the strict, ringing curfew bell we talked about earlier? The law absolutely demands that you cover your hearth fire with cold ashes, but tired, freezing, deeply exhausted people make desperate mistakes. Perhaps a sleeping mother leaves a cheap, sputtering tallow candle burning just a little too close to a dry linen curtain. Perhaps a completely overworked baker fails to sweep the violently hot coals properly out of his massive stone oven before he falls into his heavy second sleep. Or perhaps a stray nervous dog knocks over a fragile clay oil lamp in the corner of a crowded, noisy tavern. That is absolutely all it takes. A tiny spark catches a single piece of dry straw. The straw catches a wooden beam, and before anyone can even open their mouth to shout a warning, the entire room is completely engulfed in blinding, white-hot heat and thick, suffocating black smoke. If a terrible fire does actually start, there is no bright red, shining fire truck waiting to rush down the street to save you. There are no highly trained professionals, and absolutely no massive hoses spraying thousands of gallons of high-pressure water. The medieval firefighting system is incredibly primitive and almost entirely useless against a truly raging, hungry blaze. Every local parish church is strictly required by the city mayor to keep a few basic tools on hand. These usually consist of heavy, stiff leather buckets, a few long wooden ladders, and massive, heavy iron hooks permanently attached to very thick wooden poles. When the frantic, terrifying, backward ringing of the church bells finally signals a fire, the panicked citizens rush blindly into the dark street in their thin nightshirts. They quickly form long, desperate human chains, stretching all the way down the muddy alleys to the murky, freezing River Thames. They pass the heavy, sloshing leather buckets of water from shivering hand to shivering hand, throwing tiny, pathetic splashes onto a roaring inferno that simply swallows the moisture in a loud hiss of steam. When the desperate buckets of river water inevitably fail to stop the burning monster, the only remaining option is absolutely, heartbreakingly brutal. To physically stop the violent fire from spreading across the entire city, they have to deliberately create a wide gap that the leaping flames cannot jump across. This terrifying strategy is known as creating a firebreak. Desperate, sweating men take those massive iron firehooks we mentioned, throw them high up over the heavy wooden beams of the intact houses, standing directly in the path of the approaching fire, and pull backwards with all of their terrified collective strength. They literally tear the beloved homes of their perfectly innocent neighbors completely down into the mud, violently smashing the expensive timber frames and the delicate plaster walls into pieces. You could easily wake up in the middle of the pitch-black night to the horrific sound of men violently destroying your entire home, completely burying all of your worldly possessions in the dirt, simply to stop the hungry fire from reaching the very next street over. The pure, unadulterated chaos of a medieval fire is completely physically overwhelming to the fragile human senses. The noise alone is absolutely deafening. It is the violent, sharp, gunshot-like cracking of massive oak timbers, splitting perfectly in half under the intense building heat. It is the terrifying, low-pitched roar of the night wind being aggressively sucked directly into the center of the flames, feeding the beast with fresh, rushing oxygen. It is the horrific, high-pitched screaming of the trapped horses, nervous sheep and pigs, entirely unable to escape the burning wooden barns. And above all of this nightmare, it is the panicked, desperate crying of entire families running blindly through the dense, choking smoke. They frantically carry whatever heavy bundles of unwashed clothes or simple carved wooden furniture they miraculously managed to drag out the heavy door before their burning thatched roof collapsed entirely. The dark sky directly above London glows an unnatural, sickly, bright orange, turning the terrifying night into a twisted, hellish version of daylight. And if you somehow manage to survive the terrifying night, escaping the flames and the suffocating smoke, the cold morning light brings a completely new kind of profound, lingering misery. You stand shivering in the bitter, damp morning fog, looking silently down at a flat, steaming, grey expanse of white ashes and blackened, twisted pieces of iron. There is absolutely no home insurance in the dark Middle Ages. There is no helpful government relief fund waiting to help you slowly rebuild your shattered life. Everything you ever owned, the heavy wool cloak that kept you safe from the freezing rain, the scratchy straw bed you slept on, the few small copper coins you hid carefully under the wooden floorboards, is completely and permanently gone. You are instantly left with absolutely nothing but the smoky, filthy clothes currently on your back. You are instantly turned into a desperate, hungry beggar on the very same muddy streets you used to work on just yesterday. This devastating total loss is a possibility that hangs darkly over the head of every single person in London, every single night of their difficult lives. You lie completely frozen in your scratchy bed, your wide eyes straining into the absolute, suffocating darkness of your room, taking a slow, incredibly shaky breath. You wait anxiously for the distant, muffled shouting to begin, or for the panicked, backward ringing of the massive church bells to shatter the silence. But the sleeping city remains terrifyingly, beautifully quiet. As the long seconds slowly tick by in the pitch black, the sharp, bitter scent of the smoke begins to slowly, gently fade away. It was just a random gust of cold wind blowing down a tired neighbor's chimney, carrying the harmless scent of a dying, safely covered hearth fire directly past your tightly closed wooden window. You let out a long, trembling, incredibly deep sigh of absolute relief. Your fragile wooden house is not burning down into ashes tonight. You have successfully survived the falling waste from the windows, the terrible rotten food, the agonizing medical leeches, the invisible creeping diseases, and the silent deadly footpads in the alleyway. And as you finally truly close your eyes to rest, your racing mind begins to slowly drift away from this dark, freezing, incredibly filthy world. You are finally preparing to journey back across the centuries, to leave the brutal Middle Ages behind, and return to a place far, far away from the shadows of medieval London. You feel the heavy, oppressive darkness of the medieval night begin to slowly, gently lift away from your exhausted mind. The bitter, stinging scent of the wood smoke, the damp, bone-chilling cold of the river fog, and the constant terrifying scratching of the rats inside the wattle and daub walls all begin to quietly fade away into a distant, harmless memory. You are floating smoothly upwards, leaving the brutal reality of the 14th century far, far behind you. You are traveling rapidly forward through hundreds of long, difficult years of human struggle, brilliant invention, and slow, steady progress. The muddy, chaotic, incredibly noisy labyrinth of old London completely dissolves into the shadows, replaced entirely by the comforting, familiar quiet of your own time. As you completely leave the past behind, you become consciously, wonderfully aware of the physical space directly around you, right in this very moment. Take a moment to deeply appreciate the incredible, profound difference beneath your tired body. You are not lying on a rough, dirty linen sack filled with dusty, damp straw. There are absolutely no sharp, unyielding pieces of harvested grain poking violently into your back, and there are absolutely no unwanted biting insects sharing your private, personal space. Instead, you're resting on an absolute marvel of modern engineering. You have a thick, perfectly supportive mattress that gently cradles your weight. The soft sheets pulled up snugly under your chin are not made of harsh, scratchy, homespun wool that has never seen a single drop of soapy water. They are woven from incredibly fine, pure cotton or smooth modern fabrics, washed perfectly clean and smelling faintly of fresh, calming laundry detergent. Take a slow, incredibly deep breath in through your nose and feel your lungs expand. The air you are breathing right now is completely free of the choking, greasy black smoke of cheap tallow candles and the suffocating, heavy stench of the open, rotting street kennels. It is perfectly clean, temperature-controlled, and deeply, wonderfully refreshing. You do not have to violently shiver in the freezing, inescapable dampness of a drafty timber-framed room, wrapped desperately in dirty clothing just to survive until morning. With the simple, effortless push of a small plastic button, or the quiet turn of a silent dial on your wall, you completely command the exact climate of your sanctuary. Invisible waves of gentle, comforting heat or cool, crisp air circulate silently through your room, keeping you perfectly comfortable and entirely, beautifully safe from the harsh, unpredictable elements outside your window. Think for just a moment about the absolute, staggering miracle of the modern bathroom, located just a few short, easy steps down your carpeted hallway. In the Middle Ages, simply getting a single drink of safe water or washing the street dust off your tired face was a massive, physically exhausting chore involving heavily polluted rivers and backbreaking daily labor. But for you, clean, sparkling, perfectly purified water flows instantly, almost as if by pure magic, from a shining metal tap. You have the unbelievable luxury of modern indoor plumbing. You have hot, steaming showers waiting patiently to wash away the heavy stress of your long day, complete with beautifully scented soaps, rich shampoos, and thick, incredibly soft towels. You never, ever have to worry about the terrible burden of a heavy chamber pot in the dark, or fear what horrifying things might be falling from the windows above you when you walk down a city street. If you were to wake up feeling hungry in the middle of this peaceful night, you do not have to frantically gnaw on a piece of rock-hard muslin bread mixed with dirt and sawdust. You do not have to worry about eating heavily salted, rotting meat disguised by cheap, burning mustard. You have a brightly lit, perfectly chilled refrigerator humming quietly in your kitchen, filled entirely with safely preserved, fresh, and delicious food, transported safely from all over the entire globe. And if you happen to feel a slight, dry scratch in your throat or a dull, throbbing ache in your head, there is absolutely no creeping, icy terror in your heart. There are no terrifying barber surgeons waiting for you with rusty iron blades and wet, blood-sucking leeches. You have a small, perfectly clean plastic bottle of simple, scientifically proven medicine that will safely and reliably make the pain completely disappear, allowing your fragile body to heal in absolute, uninterrupted peace. When you look towards your bedroom window right now, you do not see a pitch-black, terrifying, supernatural void filled with desperate, silent footpads and unseen lurking monsters. If you peek gently through your soft curtains, you might simply see the gentle, warm, comforting glow of electric streetlights, pushing the dark, dangerous shadows safely and permanently away from your front door. Your home is not made of rotting wood and crumbling mud, secured by a simple, rusty iron bolt. It is built with incredibly strong modern materials and heavy, reliable locks, keeping your sanctuary completely, indisputably secure. There is no loud, booming curfew bell angrily forcing you into the dark against your will. The night completely belongs to you. It is a peaceful time for rest, for reading a good book, for watching a glowing screen, and for quietly recharging your mind without a single ounce of medieval paranoia. History is a truly incredible, deeply fascinating place to visit in our imaginations. It allows us to vividly explore the dramatic, dangerous, and wildly different lives of our distant ancestors. But safely visiting the muddy, noisy, and brutal streets of medieval London serves a much greater, far more important purpose than just simple nighttime entertainment. It gives us a profound, beautiful, and lasting sense of gratitude for the exact present moment. It gently reminds us that the mundane, everyday things we completely take for granted, like a clean, cold glass of tap water, a warm private shower, a painless trip to a modern dentist, and a soft, perfectly quiet place to sleep, are actually incredible, unimaginable, magical luxuries that the wealthiest, most powerful kings and queens of the past could only ever dream of having. So tonight, as you sink even deeper into your soft, clean mattress, let go of any lingering, heavy stress from your modern day. The problems of the 21st century might feel overwhelming sometimes, but compared to the brutal, exhausting struggle of the 14th century, you are living inside a literal paradise. Your world is completely safe. Your world is comfortably clean. And your world is beautifully quiet. Thank you so much for bravely walking through the terrifying muddy streets of history with me on this long, relaxing journey. If you safely survived the trip back to the present, please remember to gently tap the like button. Leave a comment below letting me know you made it back safely. And subscribe to the channel for more relaxing, immersive adventures into the past. It costs absolutely nothing, and it truly helps the channel grow to reach more tired travelers just like you. But for now, just close your eyes, take one final, incredibly deep breath of fresh, clean air, and allow yourself to drift completely away. Sleep wonderfully, sleep deeply, and sleep peacefully. Good night.